Welcome to the Events Podcast. I'm your host, Dan Taylor, and each week I talk with event professionals and entrepreneurs about how they plan, promote, and run their events. We help you build your events empire by growing your business using live events, whether you're running community meetups or conferences, trade shows, and other events. We focus on finding actionable tips that you can use straight away. We want you to get more attendees, produce epic events, make more money, and most importantly, to do it all with no stress. This podcast is sponsored by EventsFrame. Check it out over at eventsframe.com. Make the switch from Eventbrite today to our amazing ticketing and registration system with no ticket fees. Most ticketing systems charge you a minimum of 3% of the ticket price, but we just have a flat, low fee with no ticket fees and no restrictions. There's literally no system out there that is cheaper than EventsFrame. It's also super easy to use, and you can embed your tickets in your website, or you can use our own website builder, which is really simple. We have amazing options to apply all kinds of discounts and all the features you'd expect from a much more expensive system like QR code check-in. Go to eventsframe.com, that's eventsframe.com, for a free, no-risk, 1-month trial. Hi, and welcome to the Events Podcast. Today, I'm delighted to be talking to Dan Johnston, who's a friend of mine in Prague, although he's actually in Spain now, which is, as we're recording this, we're in the height of coronavirus. Well, maybe not the height, I'm not sure, the height so far of coronavirus. So we're going to get into that. Dan's a business and lifestyle coach, I guess. His website is dreamsaroundtheworld.com, and he also runs live events. He's run live events in a couple of different continents, so we'll get into that. So welcome to the podcast, Dan.
Good to catch up with you.
Yeah. So before we get into coronavirus, we want to talk about that. If what you see, because you're a very thoughtful guy. You read a lot about this, so you've got some good thoughts that are better than the average Facebooker. Before I get into that, quickly about your background. What are you? Obviously, you're from Canada. What was how did you end up as a business coach? What were the steps that kind of went there? Because a lot of people would love to do what you do. Work for yourself, live where you want, hang out, talk to interesting people. How did that come about?
Yeah, good question. I'll try not to go too off trying to explain it all.
That's fine. I can speed you up if it takes too long. It's no problem.
Yeah, perfect. So I think I've always had a interest in psychology and helping people. It sounds, I guess, plain or cheesy, but do what they actually want to do. So I can remember before I was doing this for a living, being in Vancouver and being on a date. Probably happened more than once, but one specifically comes to mind. And within an hour of the date, I'm, not convincing in a salesy way, but let's say talking her through quitting her job. And, it ended up becoming a free coaching session and not a date. And, 2 days later, she'd quit her job and started a business with her dad.
Okay.
And so I think that's been there for me for a while. When I left Canada, it was 2012, and I left it to just start traveling. I wanted to live in 5 countries before I turned 30, and I was working as a freelance copywriter, and that was just my vehicle. I liked writing, and what was nice about it is I was working with small businesses, usually coaches actually, and helping them do what they want to do. So there's an aspect of business coaching to that, like helping them find clarity, helping them figure out their message and how to present themselves. And a few years into the travel, I was in Spain, and that's when, to keep the long story short, I finally ripped off the Band-Aid and said, copywriting was paying very well, but it was just, I don't really want to write for other people. I want to write my own books. I want to be helping people more directly.
Had you read the 4-Hour Workweek? By this is a book we refer to all the time. But had you read that before you set off? Because that obviously
within the first year of it coming out, absolutely.
Yeah.
And like most people, I still need to reread it every year or two because you forget a lot of the important stuff.
Exactly. Yeah. Cool. So you were a freelancer, and then obviously working with coaches, and I guess you were probably kind of thinking, actually, I could probably do a better job than some of these people are doing.
I've had that feeling when I've hired coaches. A lot of the coaches I worked for were pretty rock stars. I don't have too much bad to say. But even before I left Canada, I had done Tony Robbins' coaching program. I had done NLP. I had a degree in psychology. So I was sort of lined up to do it, but just had a lot of maybe a mix of fear and also feeling like I wanted a bit more life experience before I started talking out of my ass about things.
Yeah. So you were freelancing, and you were in Spain at the time when you had this realization that you wanted to start kind of working for your own clients.
Yes, exactly.
And like, I'm curious, like, how did you, because I imagine the hardest, maybe I'm wrong, but I'd imagine the hardest thing would be to get your first client. Because obviously you've got to probably be a bit vague about how many clients you've got. And I'm not sure I'm not sure if you up front and said, look, you're my first client, but how did you get your first client?
So I was pretty upfront about that I was starting off.
Yeah.
I had a bit of not a big leg up, but I had an email list of maybe 250 people.
Right.
Which was primarily from a webinar I co-hosted with a friend a few months back that he helped organize. And then a few like friends and family and some of my own clients and things like that.
Right.
And I did an email series. I just wrote up basically saying, I'm starting this. I think I'll be good. I'll be cheap. It was $200 a month for biweekly calls and $300 a month for weekly calls. So not insanely cheap, but on the lower end of coaching, I would say.
Yeah.
And that ended up, I obviously applied my copywriting skills, and that ended up with 4 or 5, I think 5 clients. And then that was my basic. I mean, I was living cheap in Spain, living in a room. So my expenses were maybe €1,000 a month if I wasn't living large. And I think I was covering that, which allowed me to basically stop copywriting. And
so yeah, you could have like 3 clients and cover your cost of living at that point, basically.
yeah, which is a big upside of the location independence in terms of moving somewhere cheap if you want to have more freedom. Like I could have, and I did have the occasional copywriting client because at that point it was paying very well, and why not? But it's nice to be able to really focus on what you want to do and not be, okay, I have a $8,000 a month bills to pay. So I really have very little freedom, right? In terms of pivoting, at least in the early days.
It's interesting because, I've never had a business coach. My only coaching has been kind of the mastermind we all had together in Prague, which was a lot of fun, which was more kind of drinking weekends than masterminding, but it was like, I enjoyed it.
It was drinking weekends and you dropping the knowledge bombs. For those who don't know Dan too well in real life, one of the other members who knows him longer, Simon Whistler, would say to me, like, that just whatever Dan Taylor says, just listen. Because you'd be sitting there, you'd be sort of lying on the ground and being the casual guy, and then you'd just be listening, and then you drop a knowledge bomb, and they'd almost always be right.
Well, very nice of you to say so. But I don't know. I think people just psychologically forget the bad advice people give and remember the good advice. But it's interesting about coaching, because I've never had a coach, but I was one guy. We're both members of the Dynamite Circle, this group, and there's one guy in there who's a really cool guy. And I was thinking to engage him, and I had a chat with him, and it was just that the price was, like $3,000 a month. And this guy, like, and everything he was saying, I'm like, yes, that's great. But then I was like, $3,000 a month? I don't know. I didn't do it. And it's a real psychological thing because, clearly if it goes well, you'll make a lot more than $3,000 a month, but it was a price, and I think just for me, the kind of price you were putting it at is that's a lot more. You'll think, well, it doesn't work out, I don't know. It's very tough to know how to price your services, because obviously as you get more experience, you're going to increase them. But I wonder how that psychology works with pricing from a coach's point of view.
It's something I struggle with right now, because I do think, some coaches will just charge a really high number and work with anyone and sort of encourage people, say, to like get in debt or whatever. Because at least if you're working with Americans, a lot of people have access to money, whether or not they should spend it. Then there's coaches, probably like the one you're talking about, who just works with people earning a lot of money. So they're like, this is what it's going to cost. And it will be worth it, because if you double your income or whatever it is. I have trouble because I think about the practical aspect of the money. Like, this is a lot of money for people. But then I'm also going back, like, what is it worth for me now to actually have those calls? Because most coaches, you can maybe work with 10 one-on-one clients. You're just drained. It's not something you do like a 40-hour week, 40 sessions a week.
Yeah.
And so I think,
coach, I guess you're spending a lot of time actually thinking about their problems, what they could do.
Yeah. And I think you're also, I think of, a boxer. A boxer doesn't box 40 hours a week, right? You sort of need to be in a really good headspace when you're having those calls. And then I think for me, okay, what would it actually be worth? for me to then be writing less or filming less courses, or I think about the group programs I do. And when I actually do the math on those, what the hourly would work out to for me in terms of earnings. And it's very hard for me to price one-on-one.
Yeah.
And so I've basically stopped doing one-on-one. I have a few packages on my site when people contact me. I actually took the coaching page off my site, off the menu, but some people still end up finding it, I think, through Google or through links and old videos it was in or something. I basically have some packages, and that if they really want to buy, they can. But I'm trying to move more and more to, especially with what's happening now with the virus and economy, is I'm trying to move more towards the wider side. So what can I do where I may be serving 20 people at a time and offering them really good value, but it's affordable as well. But for me, it ends up being more energizing. I generally find, for me personally, it's more energizing to be leading a group of people than do one-on-ones.
Sure.
And I think they get more value out of it too.
And do they have like a kind of forum where they can talk to each other and help each other as well? Or is it kind of a one-to-many approach?
I'm starting to do that more. So with the group calls I do, they've always been, everyone has video. So it's a Zoom call. It's not a webinar.
Yep.
And so there's interaction, but I recently started doing at the end of calls, breakout rooms, where basically you split 8 people or 10 people and they go into rooms of 2 or 3.
Yep.
That was something I just thought I'd try out, and it's been awesome. Like the reaction has been really positive. I have to leave my computer on running the meetings. Yeah. So I will leave at the end and set the breakout rooms. I say, take 10 or 15 minutes. And the other day, I think it was a Saturday night. And so I left the call running, muted myself and left it running. And 3 hours later, I come and they're still in the group. And I think it might be a technical error. And they emailed me after and said they spent 3 hours talking about their businesses and it was the best call they've ever had. And so more and more, I'm going to try to integrate that in terms of just using each other's knowledge.
After the call stays on and you can all stay on the chat,
Yeah.
So I guess, your business, because obviously I want to come onto the live events part of it, because you've run a couple of events, which is, even though that's kind of a focus of a podcast, it's, we talk about a lot more general business things, but how's it transitioned then? So is you went from doing a few one-to-one clients to taking on more clients to doing kind of group coaching and making more video content. Is that kind of the progression of the business?
Yes, I would say generally. Yeah.
Cool. And how did you end up doing your live events? Because I know, what have you done? You've done some in South America and some in Prague. And what can you talk a bit about what you've done and for your community in terms of these events?
Yeah, I've done, 2 in Prague, 1 in Spain, 1 in Mexico, and 1 in Canada, I think. Yep. I did them fairly small as events. Part of that is I do like the small events where we actually go out for dinners and everything together. Part of it is poor marketing on my end. I'd be lying if I said my number wasn't more 20, 25 when I organized the first one that I was hoping for. It takes a lot to market an event, because for my events, people are coming. The one I did in Spain, 2 of the 4 people, or I think 2 of the 5 people came from North America.
Yep.
For a 4-day event, which is surprised me. And so you do need to market well in advance, and my personality doesn't do that extremely well. So yeah.
Your events are kind of like all like almost like an immersive event. You come for, you have sessions, I guess some social activities. It's kind of days and evenings. It's kind of pretty much the whole 4 days, is it?
Yeah, it definitely is. And what I was thinking of doing this year, although something apparently is happening in the world that makes it hard to throw events right now, is I was thinking of doing them with less focused training, because one of the things I found is the couple of weeks before the event, I'm fairly stressed because I'm thinking about the training days and what I'll be teaching. And I tend to not recycle content. I tend to teach new stuff each time, which is good and bad. And so what I was thinking is, let's just do these events where it's more like a mastermind, and I prepare some stuff and I guide, but I don't have that pressure of 4 or 5 days. And instead it's 4 or 5 days of lecturing or training or whatever term we want to use. it's more about connecting people and the social element, and whatever happens sort of happens.
And are you like renting a large property and everyone stays there, or are people staying in different places and you're all just meeting up during the day?
Generally meet up during the day. Let's see, three of the events we used a house for the daily meetups. And then the one in Canada, the last one I did, we actually ended up renting a house
Right.
and everyone stayed there. And that was more just me looking at the cost of hotels. I didn't realize in Vancouver in August, they were going to be $300-400 a night.
Yeah.
And I was just thinking about my events so far have been newer entrepreneurs. And I'm like, that's just a waste of money, even though some of my guests can afford it
Yeah.
because they have a good job and they want to transition. That's a waste of people's money. So we ended up renting a house and it went really well. Like, people loved the house setup. So
Cool. Now, I mentioned before coronavirus. Obviously, as we record this, it's 3rd of April, 2020. It's kind of going pretty bad. Like, I'm in Prague at the moment because we should mention that you're based in Prague, although you travel quite a bit, but you're currently in Spain. What's the situation like? Can you just give us a feeling of what it's like there? Because obviously Spain is unfortunately kind of, I think second to Italy in terms of the number of deaths and the number of cases in Europe. And how is it there? What's it like to live there?
it's so, to give a bit of a background, not to play the know-it-all, but I saw this coming very obviously in Spain.
Yeah.
I'm in Valencia now, and Valencia has a low amount of cases, fortunately. But there was a football match in northern Italy when the outbreak was starting there, and it was the Valencian team versus the Italian team. Spanish fans who went and came back brought a bunch of cases. I think the team journalist got it, and the team was scared he got all the players sick. And this was early March. There was a game March 9th where the Italian team was supposed to come here. At this point, the Italian villages, some of them in that area, are already on full lockdown and quarantine.
Yep.
So the Italian fans, thousands of them, were supposed to come to Valencia. The government, both the federal and local governments, said, who are we to tell people what they can do in terms of allowing and the game, not only the game to continue like a crowd, but actually people, thousands from northern Italy coming here.
Yeah.
And the only reason, as far as I know, they didn't is because Italy, by the time the game was going to happen, stopped their people from leaving.
Right.
And there was supposed to be an event here March 15th, where in Valencia specifically, where about 1 million people a day come from Spain, and Italy's the biggest country that sends people.
Wow.
And they didn't cancel that until 3 days before. They just kept saying, hey, we'll see what happens. We'll see what happens. So Spain, I think, will be the worst in the world. Per capita, it already is.
What's the reason? Is it just what you're saying? They just didn't close. They didn't restrict travel. Is that kind of the reason it's got so? Because I'm not clear why it's so bad in Spain.
Really incompetent government.
Yeah.
On March 6th, there was, I think, 400 or 500 cases, and they were reporting numbers every day. But on March 8th, there was a giant rally the government, which is a left government, wanted to have for Women's Day and to get these new laws passed. Laws that are probably good. I don't know the details of the law. But the health minister was asked, should people go to these rallies? And even the health minister said yes. And the government encouraged people. So on March 8th, there was millions of people going out to rallies, like Hong Kong protest level of crowding.
Yeah.
And that was encouraged by the government. They did not release any numbers for the 2 days before or that day to not show the growth. And then on March 9th, when they released it, it had went from 400 cases to 1,100. So they were probably hiding those numbers. That will be a big invest. But that's the accusation right now because they wanted their law passed.
Wow.
And so even now you go out and there's less people out, but half the people have masks at the supermarket. The cashier the other day had her mask hanging below her chin. This is at Lidl, a German chain. So you would expect if anyone has the rules.
Yeah.
And
like in the Czech Republic, it's every single person wears a mask. Every child. I mean, it's the law, but everyone follows it. Amazing. A lot of homemade ones, which I still think have some benefits. They stop you sneezing or coughing. There is some, effect on that, I guess. You know more than me.
Yeah.
Just to step in here quickly to mention our sponsor, Events Frame, a project I'm co-founder of, and I want to mention our integrations, which we believe are the best available. Firstly, payment integrations. You can connect any payment gateway such as Stripe, PayPal, from Braintree, or even bank account or take cash. You can connect everything to Events Frame. We also have the best marketing integrations out there with every email marketing system, including MailChimp, Zapier, Infusionsoft, Aweber, Drip. And we've got deep integrations with all the social media platforms like Facebook, Google, and Twitter. We've got thousands of events live on Events Frame right now, ranging from small community meetups to huge trade shows and conferences. Check it out over at eventsframe.com. That's eventsframe.com. And now, back to the interview.
Yeah, that seems to be my understanding. And in some countries, when the press talks about should you wear a mask, they say, they mostly just protect other people, not you, so don't bother. And you're like, what? What kind of an individualistic society do we live in where you're like, there's a virus where you can spread it for a week without any symptoms, without knowing you have it. And you're telling people, don't bother wearing masks. They only protect other people.
Exactly. That's the same. And what are the numbers in Spain now? Like, how many infections there are now?
I haven't checked in the last day or two. I think the official is probably 115 now. 115,000.
115,000. Gee,
yeah. The dead broke 10,000 a day or two ago. Unofficial numbers. So I sent out some calculations. So you can figure out, not to get too much into the weeds, but you can figure out the real amount of cases in a country by looking at the death rate. And then the amount of people that die in the last week will tell you about the amount of active cases there were 2 to 4 weeks ago, because no one dies within the first couple of weeks of having it. And now there's other factors. So for instance, the fact that in Madrid, people are sleeping on towels in the hospital hallways means that their ability to care for people is less, which means you're going to have a higher mortality rate than you otherwise would. But Spain, there's a graph I was looking at the other day, but basically Spain has 10,000 dead now, and most of those are in the last 2 weeks, which tells us that 2 weeks ago there was probably roughly 1 million cases of actual cases. And there's some other evidence that actually they're only reporting about a third of the deaths even. So they're not counting anyone who isn't tested, anyone who dies at home. And because there's one of the newspapers looked at how many people are actually dying compared to a normal year, like just total death. And there's all these unaccounted for. So they were arguing that there's probably for every one official, there's probably 2 more unofficial.
Yep.
So that would mean in either case, I think the real numbers here are somewhere between 3 and 10 million active would be my guess, which is, I mean, it's a country of 45 million people. So, and they're concentrated in Madrid and Barcelona areas. So that I would guess that means like, I don't know, half the people there have it. I don't know what that.
Wow, it's interesting. So, like, I mean, it's obviously tragic, and I want to, even though not to be insensitive, but I want to talk a bit about the business when how this is going to get business going, because obviously the economic impact is also hugely important. Not to take away from the tragedy, obviously, but what do you think of the scenarios, like, I guess, globally in terms of how this goes? There's obviously a lot of things that could happen now. We're at a turning point. It could become like Spanish flu. Wasn't that apparently from Spain? But or it could become. Companies could get control of it, or maybe certain countries get control of it. Like, what do you think are like the scenarios, and what do you think are the most likely ones of where we go like with this right now?
I think the biggest game changer is going to be the antigen test to see if you've had the virus and are now immune.
Testing, yeah.
Germany's been talking about issuing immunity certificates. I made this sci-fi prediction a few weeks ago, but we didn't get my video online, so I have no proof or credit. But it was filmed, but not produced. But I think that will be a huge game changer, because the intelligent countries are going to test massively. That will give us way more data to actually see. It's supposed to be a test you can basically get on Amazon, like a pregnancy test.
Yeah.
That's going to give way more data. Fingers crossed, it turns out the mortality rate is a lot lower and it's just a really, really contagious virus, so that there actually is millions of people who've had it.
Yeah.
We're spreading it, but didn't know. Or like me and Gabby had, fingers crossed, we had it around the 14th, 15th, which we had, she had a fever for a few days. I had a fever one night. I had shortness of breath for 4 or 5. It was also a very stressed time. That was right when the lockdown was starting and we were moving places. Shortness of breath can be a, guy bearing all his stress inside sort of thing as well. But so it was like mild symptoms. We weren't tested, obviously. So I think that's going to give us a lot more numbers once those antigen tests come out. And it also, I think governments will start to, if I was in charge, which more and more after seeing how governments react, I think maybe I should be, but
president of the world.
But what I think they should be doing is they'll give you an immunity certificate to allow you to function normally with 2 clauses. One is you cannot post on social media anything outside, because what happens in a society where half of them are locked up and can't work and the other half are posting selfies at the beach? That's going to get pretty nasty over a year.
People will be not allowed to post on social media.
That's what I don't think they will do that, but I think that's how you maintain a society without it falling apart too much.
Sure.
You get the Kim Kardashians of the world posting there, "I'm at the beach, suckers, I've had the virus, you don't" stuff.
Yeah.
And the other thing is to mandate, you have to volunteer a minimum of 1 day a week, maybe even more. So aside from doing your job, if you're immune now, work at hospitals, do deliveries, work at a grocery store, do something that you're not at risk of spreading it to people. You're not at risk of getting it. I think you're going to see the UK. I think some official estimates are that there's already 1 million cases. I think they said that it's 10 to 20 times. Spain, I think, is probably even more than that 10 or 20 times figure. And so if you think about that, 1 million people, 2 million who can return, who can go visit with older people who are stuck at home all day, who can start to help everyone with their sanity a bit, that could start to really be a positive turning point. I won't go into too much details, but my sci-fi prediction is you then get dens where people try to get intentionally infected to get immunity so they can go back to work. That's sort of a natural progression. Right? If you can get a certificate and now suddenly you can return to normal life, if you're young and healthy, it's only natural you're going to then try to get it.
I think there's got to be what you said, once there's a widely available test, then that's going to be changing, because then people will start to travel again. There's going to be a lot of restrictions. You might need a test. I mean, in Hong Kong, so I work with schools in Hong Kong, some of them are starting to open some days a week with half the kids coming one day, half another, temperature checks twice a day for everyone, the handheld kind of gun-like thing. So I think there's going to be a bit of after 9/11, there was all this kind of, the TSA and security stuff. There's just going to be a ton of temperature checking. Maybe you have to get a wristband, like in Hong Kong, when you've come back from another country, you have to wear a certain wristband that's trackable with an app. Maybe there's a few of these kind of dystopian solutions, but maybe it starts getting, because obviously with the thing we all want, obviously, don't need to keep saying it, but apart from people to stop dying, is the world to get back to normal again, people to be able to travel, do their jobs, just engage in commerce and things as well. So I don't know, I think the testing, once that happens, there's going to be some normality and movement again, I think.
I think definitely. And aside from the antigen test, the relatively instant test for the virus, I think it's the UK that has one that should get down to $5 or $10 a test. And be good in 15 minutes, because then you could test at airports on both sides. You test when you board, you test when you get off. That's enough to also account for errors in the testing if you're doing double tests. Maybe there will end up being some travel that will be it will probably be expensive. Maybe like an elite travel, some resorts start to open with a lot of protocols in place. I think some governments like Germany and the UK are already thinking about this, because they're really, I think, no one's that organized right now, except maybe Russia, but once things settle, government, everyone's running around like in panic mode. And we know as entrepreneurs, if you're really stressed and overwhelmed, you're not thinking right. You're not
Yeah.
thinking to the future. You're in panic mode. That's the Spanish government for the past 3 weeks. And I do have some empathy for that. Most of the members of the government even have the virus. So you're sick, you're overwhelmed, you're stressed. My hope is once things calm down a bit, people will think rationally about, what can we do with immune people? How can we have them serving the communities? How can we enable some levels of travel or restaurants even with more testing? You need a society, though, that will follow these rules. Because I think one of the fears here, and Spanish people have said this to me, is like here you're not allowed to go for a walk or go to the park or anything. Like you can't leave your house unless it's to shop. And even then it's like one person and everything. I think the fear is if they give people any leeway that people will break the rules.
Yeah.
And so where in Asia that seems to be working, my friends are in Beijing. They were together. She's returned to Germany last week. But to go into a restaurant, you need a certain app on your phone. That app registers you've been there. And then if anyone there has had the virus, you get notified and you have to self-quarantine. And they use the facial recognition to see if you're breaking your quarantine. And
that can happen in the West then? I mean, I would have said like 3 months ago, I would have said never in a million years. But now I think it's possible that could happen,
I think they have an app in the Czech Republic, or they're working on one, but it's voluntary now. But these more progressive countries in terms of technology, not necessarily politics, are doing hackathons and trying to figure out tech solutions to help. Because it makes sense. If you can track everyone's movements with their phones already, then track it. And Google already has all that data generally. So just use that data to let them know, hey, there was an outbreak at the supermarket you were at. You should probably quarantine or whatever it is.
Cool. Now let's talk about the business side of this, because most people that listen to this podcast are running some kind of events, and it's been a really great experience doing this podcast. And I get that from based on the emails I get, there's a really broad range of people. There's people running, like people like you, who events is kind of not their main thing, but they run meetups. And then there's a lot of people who listen to this who actually run their own conferences, and some people that run trade shows, big thousands of people events. So this clearly is a bad time for in-person meetup businesses. I would say is an understatement of the century.
I think that goes without saying.
And I'm laughing because it's my business as well, so it's like laughing in the face of adversity. Clearly there's businesses that won't survive. Clearly a lot of people have run events that have had to be canceled. Like when do we think that people are going to be able to run events again and of any level? And when do you think, it's really going to be realistic? I mean, I'm not asking you to put it. I am asking you to bring a crystal ball. Clearly you don't know, but
I don't mind being wrong and just making estimates. Everything I've heard in terms of a proper vaccine is, and that's the longest estimate out in terms of when things will go back to normal, is roughly summer next year. Apparently Johnson & Johnston is working on one vaccine. So there's already 20 or so vaccines that have been made.
Yeah.
It doesn't take a lot of time to make a vaccine. The thing is you then have to test it, because some vaccines will give you the virus. Some will lead to the virus being worse if you get it.
As well to get things approved,
It's sort of a year with all the rules dropped right now, basically, to test it. So, and then you have production. So Johnson & Johnson is working on one, which is hopeful because they have the capacity to produce 1 billion. They can convert whatever factories they have. So that's the long case, right? The worst case out.
Yeah.
I think you're going to see as we've seen with this virus, every government reacts differently. There is no even within the EU, everywhere is reacting differently. But I would guess by this summer, some governments start to have extreme penalties if you break the rules, but then allow a lot more freedom within the rules. Right. Something like you can do events, but you have to be pre-tested when before you leave your house. You get tested at the door, maybe. The event happens in one hotel or something. I don't know exactly how they do it. We saw it in
See,
South
we're
Korea.
right now, but I think that's how people are thinking. Because if you look now in the fall or the autumn, if you're English, like a lot people are still keeping their event schedule. Anything I'm seeing, events I'm involved in, September, October, people still have it on the diary, And
Yeah.
I think they're still hoping and praying that there'll be either widespread testing or maybe early days of an antidote, to run these events. I mean, I don't know if it's going to happen. I really don't know. I think it's optimistic though.
Yeah. I think whether or not it happens, it's optimistic. That's what we've seen with people. When Spain had 800 cases or 5, they were like, this will probably get better. Like with no explanation of how it will get better. There's just hey, things work out, right? Like without, explaining how that would happen biologically. But yeah, I think in Europe, there's going to end up being a lot more immunity than we think. Spain may be the first to come out of this tragically because basically everyone's got it. I could see a place like Spain by May, if the numbers are right, it's still spreading every 5 days, doubling every 5 days here.
Yeah.
At one point, it was doubling every 2 days, where normal countries, it doubles every 4, 5, 6 days. So Spain was doing something to supercharge it. And even now with the full lockdown, I think the last I checked, it was doubling every 5 days, which means if there's, you do that math, if there's 2 million cases now in 10 days, that's 8 million. So you might start to see countries that have been hit hard come through with more immunity. And if a third of the population has immunity, there's these certificates that events and things can start to return to normal. Not fully normal, but some level of it.
I mean, I guess if it really does double, it keeps doubling every 5 days and that doesn't stop. I mean, it will only be a matter of weeks before everyone has it. And it's just a case of everyone has it. And then it's got to go, even in the worst case scenario of everyone getting it,
I think Boris Johnson was, I don't know if he necessarily knew all the math when he was talking about this, but the early UK strategy was essentially this. He said, if you're over 70, lock yourself up. Yeah. If you're younger, kind of function as normal, we'll end up with a herd immunity. And then
they changed their mind.
He changed their mind because that whole aspect everyone's heard now about flatten the curve, right? If you have too many cases at once. But now you're seeing, everyone was impressed when China built those hospitals, but you're seeing the same thing in the UK and the US,
Which amazes me, given, I'm English, given the horrendous, if you've grown up in England, the infrastructure projects, Wembley Stadium, they was insane, went a million times over budget, high-speed rail. Britain can't do anything. All of a sudden, there's like the wartime spirit. We're building all these hospitals. It's just amazing,
It is. And I think we'll see that in the US as well. Countries when they really get behind, when companies start to back it. Like I know in the UK, I think Formula One and a few other companies are now making not ventilators, but something similar, or not incubators, sorry, but something similar that helps with breathing. So yeah, I think he was too ahead of that, where it's no, you need to flatten the curve and give time to get these new hospitals, to get equipment, to get everything in place. But that aspect of once a certain amount of people get it and then testing for immunity and then letting people return to life, because there is a flip side to being locked up. There's going to be mental health issues, some of the darker things in terms of, abusive relationships, unhappy, living experiences. We're both in fairly big places and happy relationships.
Yeah.
You've got, an unhappy living situation in a small apartment where you sort of survive because you're both out all day and the kids are out.
Well, that's the thing. Even like, I'd like to think I've got a good relationship, but even then, like, and I'm lucky I get to come out to my office, but you got a small child, the wife's pregnant. There's like, there's stresses. And imagine if the relationship was going badly, which a lot of relationships are, or, I don't know what's worse. Like, imagine if you're single now and you're maybe unhappy because you're single, and like
I hear Tinder's amazing right now.
What's that, sorry?
I've heard Tinder is amazing right now, and there's still covert dating happening in Prague.
Can you imagine, like, if you were a single man or woman, like when this ends, like it's going to be the best dating scene of all time. Everyone is going to be wanting to meet people.
I'm trying to convince Gabby to give me like a free 5-day pass when quarantine ends. Like we can both have a 5-day pass.
I hope so. What? So okay, we don't know. We think maybe people are running events in October, maybe next year. But is this going to affect people, the whole concept of live events in the future? Because you've already mentioned, I mean, travel, worst case scenario, it could become a rich person's thing again. Maybe people are reluctant to go to live events. Maybe people are scared it's going to come back again next winter and mutate and it won't be a thing. Is this, what are the scenarios? I mean, there's obviously a worse than the best case, but how do you think this is going to affect the live events kind of industry or even people doing it casually in the future?
I think there's two possible ways it goes. One is you have, and maybe both actually happen with different people. So one is what happens, if you're, let's say, on a diet for a while, like a strict diet. When you go off it, it can go one of two ways. You can go extreme and just be like, oh my God, I'm going to eat in my case, it's nachos is my thing.
Yeah.
And
you're on a strict diet, so you can speak from experience,
Yeah, well, and from my experience doing keto, which I'm less strict in lockdown here, but even when I'm off it, I tend to eat a lot better because it's changed some behavior, right?
Sure.
It broke sugar addictions. It made me realize you can make some delicious food with vegetables and broccoli and, whatever. So you might see both. You might see people who learn to appreciate being more intimate with their partners in terms of like playing board games and being close together and spending time. You might have both sides. So people realize like, hey, virtual stuff, it works really well. I'm talking to some clients about doing virtual music lessons and doing like a 2-camera setup. So you can show like their fingers on the piano and their face at the same time or these sorts of things. So you might have people both, where some people are just, I can't wait to get back to other humans. I can't wait to be at events. And you might have others who kind of get used to it and are like, this isn't so bad.
It's interesting because like this is a whole, we're on a Google Hangouts meet now, and people are using Zoom, and it's this whole new world. Everyone's all these, but the thing is, like, this has been my life for the last 8 years. I spend my whole life on Hangouts. Like, I'm in Prague. I go to our events, maybe once a month, but most of the time, and and everyone's like discussing if this is the way it could be. I mean, we're running online training now, obviously, and it's great. We've got signups, and this is a business line we'll have afterwards. I still don't think it's going to be everything. I mean, this isn't new to me, and I've been through this, and it doesn't really get that much easier. I mean, it's tiring doing video chat,
Yeah.
And if you're doing it all day, like it's all right, but it's you just need to get away from it and walk around, and meeting people is really different. I can't see. I mean, that's a discussion. Our virtual training events and conferences going to take over, and I don't think so. Unless we just don't get this virus under control and we have to do it. I don't see it as a solution personally, having done this for 8 years.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I'm in the same boat. My business hasn't really changed, except for the face-to-face events, which I was doing, once or twice a year.
Yeah.
And it hasn't changed. I think there's a lot of upside though to the in-person.
Yeah.
And so I agree with you. I think people will go back. A lot of the point of coming to events, whether it's conferences or events like mine, is getting sort of a mix of a holiday, getting to go out with new people. And that's something actually I'm trying to figure out how to wrap my head around and do virtually, to get some element of that feeling. But I think we are, we're from a very social species, and we've been moving in this direction of virtual, text messaging instead of having drinks together and all this. But either this will be the final nail in the coffin for old social behavior, or we'll realize how great it is. And I think most people will realize how great it is.
Cool. Well, that's probably a good place to finish, actually, after all the misery and a slightly optimistic note. Dan, great to talk as always. Like, dreamsaroundtheworld.com. Anything else you want to promote, or is that the place that links to everything?
That links to everything. I guess people listening here like podcasts. So the podcast is just Dreams Around the World in whatever podcast app, Spotify, all that, or on YouTube. And
cool.
That's
Dreams
it.
Around the World. Yeah, check it out. I've listened to a couple of episodes. It looks good. Dan, thanks very much, and good luck in Spain.
Thank you. You too.